Hello and welcome back to Kairos, here again with the one and only Fraser Pierce to talk about hellfire teaching in the Gospels. Fraser, good to have you back.
Yeah, good to be here.
So, Fraser, here in Australia, the topic of hell, strangely enough, has been in the news a bit recently. Those Australian viewers will most likely know what I'm talking about. If you don't, you can look it up online to do with one of our Australian sports stars, a rugby player, and some things in the news. It's just got us thinking a bit more about this topic. We've had a few conversations about it. And one of the things that I've heard you bring to people's attention on a number of occasions is just the way in which Jesus himself actually does, on the one hand, talk about hell, but he seems to do it in particular contexts more than others. I wonder if you can share your thoughts on that with us today.
Yeah, I mean, the longer I've spent in pastoral ministry, the more, I think because of my pastoral office, I've attended to how the Gospels are written, the body language that's described, the audiences in the narrative. What I mean is, sometimes it's counterintuitive. You know, you get the Gospels clearly saying that Jesus only speaks to the crowds in parables, and you might think the Gospels say that because, you know, the crowds need simple stories so they'll understand.
Like sermon illustrations.
Right, you know, these are simple agrarian folk, they need simple images that they can get in their minds and think through God's will for them. But the texts say that Jesus teaches the crowds in parables only so that they won't understand. Something mysterious is going on there. And only afterwards, when he's alone with his disciples, does he unpack the meaning of the parables.
And there's a lot of this going on in the Gospels, isn't there? There's crowds and there's disciples and then there's an inner sanctum of disciples, and it seems to be all these different settings into which Jesus is teaching.
Yeah, right. I think sometimes people take Sunday school knowledge of the stories, which is fine, but they take this into adulthood and I think they don't need to reflect further on them, right? But actually they're very sophisticated and they bear a lot of deep meditation from an adult point of view. So you teach them in their simplicity to kids indeed, but then as adults I think we need to step up a bit and consider what's going on.
Okay, so how does this dynamic play out when it comes to so-called hellfire teaching?
Well, let's think of Matthew's Gospel. There's a word, a Gehenna in the Greek, which is used there, which is often translated into English as hell, and we understand that it's some sort of burning garbage dump, literally, near Jerusalem. And Jesus uses this word as a place of exclusion, of torment, hell, right? You might guess, if you didn't know, that when Jesus uses this language, he'd be using it with the crowds. You lot, you're going to hell. You know, turn around. Don't you understand your destination? But in fact, when you read the Gospels, he does not speak this way to the crowds. It's with his disciples that he gives these teachings, and indeed he warns his hand-picked, chosen disciples about hell. It's true in the Sermon on the Mount, the crowds are listening in, but he's speaking to his disciples. Now, I think this is actually very significant in how the church presents teaching on hell. Do we kind of blanket teach this to people who are outside? I don't think we ought to, following the example of Jesus, but we ought to, on the other hand, speak very clearly within the church. And I'll give you an example that I've used just from household life. It's an analogy. In my own household with my own children, sometimes I have to give teaching which is threatening. For example, you know, I literally say things like this: kids, don't stick the fork into the toaster when it's plugged in. If your bread's stuck down there, unplug the toaster. Take it to mum and dad. Only then attend to the stuck bread.
One of those things that you think, as a parent, you're never going to have to say, but
no,
on a regular basis,
you see the child approach the toaster with a fork in hand. No, right? Now, I don't say those things to my kids because I want to scare them, right? I say them because I love my kids. I don't want them harmed. They need real warnings about how the world really is. It's great having a toaster in the household, but there are issues, and you have to treat toasters respectfully, right? So I teach my own children about the toasters, and that's how it should work in the household. However, I don't go to my neighbours' houses, knock on the doors, say, kids, come to the front. Let me tell you about toasters and how dangerous they are. Don't stick a fork in a toaster, you get killed. It's true those kids may need to hear it, but teaching like that they need to hear from their own parents in a context of love. So I think in the church we indeed need to hear teaching about hell, Gehenna, but we need to hear about it in the context of love and God's will for our lives. So in our congregation, indeed, we preach the whole counsel of God. At least that's our aim as Christian pastors here. We don't want to water down the gospel or to sideline teachings which come from our Lord himself. But we want to make sure that our people know these teachings flow from the love of Christ, that the man who gives these teaching lays down his life for us, that his word actually brings life and healing as we receive it in trust. And so he confidently handed on, but also show some discretion, some care in how he handed on and the audience to whom we handed on.
Well, thank you, Fraser, for your thoughts on this today, the topic of hell and hellfire teaching, particularly thinking about how our Lord himself directs this teaching in the Gospels, in the context of love, those already chosen and following him. This is Kairos. Subscribe to the channel, like this video and share it around. God bless you. We'll see you next time.